Hi, I'm Carl Aspelund. I'm the Department Chair of Textiles, Fashion, Merchandising, and Design. I've been here at URI in one capacity or another for the last 26 years, teaching design and design-related courses. Every time I walk across the quad toward Quinn, I get that thought that I had here the first day I arrived in 1996. I get to be here. I'm including sustainability in all the courses I teach now. I think it's very important that we all educate ourselves on how to be careful about our environment and how to discern how the products we are using and buying and discarding are influencing and impacting our surroundings. I have researched extensively the use of clothing and apparel in the creation of identity, whether that's in individuals, groups, or entire nations. And now I'm getting involved in the ocean plastics research. What I'm most excited right now about the sustainability aspect of what I do is that I've recently become part of the ocean plastics team. That's a cross-campus effort that has members from engineering, has members from ocean science, has members from the College of Business, and a lot more. And we're really directly going to start looking at this problem of ocean plastics on a large scale, on a small scale, and in terms of textiles, which is really impactful on the microscopic scale. Two of the members of the ocean plastics team are Isabella and Sarai. Isabella is a recently hired textile scientist in the Department of Textiles, Fashion, Merchandising, and Design. And she's ramping up a really exciting research program on harvesting microplastics from the ocean and turning them into filaments and fibers for reuse. Now, Sarai, however, is a social scientist, an ethnographer working in the College of Business, and she's been working with Marine Affairs and other groups already on this problem, looking at the perception of different populations on the problem of marine plastics. We really need to get people on task in thinking about how textiles, both in production, use, laundry, and recycling, impacts our environment, and we need to really start changing that now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Lapointe, and on behalf of the URI Foundation and Alumni Engagement, I'd like to welcome you to our program today. We're happy to present the first in our spring semester Faculty Office Hour series, where we're exploring the theme of sustainability. Today, we welcome 3 faculty members from the Department of Textiles, Fashion, Merchandising, and Design within the College of Business. Acting as moderator of the discussion is Dr. Carl Aspelund, who you just met in the video. He is an anthropologist with an art and design background whose research interests are directed toward the role apparel and design plays in the creation of personal, ethnic, and national identity. Environmental concerns, especially in how the design community needs to contribute to environmental sustainability, are also an increasing area of interest and focus. He is joined by Dr. Isabella Luisa Ciesielska-Wrobel, Assistant Professor of Textiles, Fashion, Merchandising, and Design, and Dr. Sarai Erganay, Assistant Professor of Management. If you have questions for any of our guests, please post them in the chat section on your screens. We'll do our very best to get to as many questions as we can after the presentation. And just to note, today's program will be recorded. In a few days, for those who registered for the event, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording, along with some recommended resources for further reading. You'll also be receiving a very brief survey from us, and we welcome your feedback. Now, it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Aspelund.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm so glad you could join us to hear our thoughts on this all too important topic. And I'm very happy to be here with Isabella and Sarai. There they are. Wonderful. And so before I let them tell us what they're up to, I want to tell you that Isabella earned her bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D. in textile technology and textile manufacturing, and is currently interested in a wide range of things around textile technologies, knitting, smart textiles, the perception of textiles, the conversion and processing of ocean plastic wastes, technical and protective textiles, high performance materials, metal, organic frameworks. We could have her on all day. But today, ocean plastics. Now, Sarai, however, she has a PhD from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where she got the critical analysis tools she needs to questions assumptions underlying management theories and practices. Now, the central theme of her research is sustainability, and her projects explore organizations that challenge the conventional norms of the business cases. So we have, all three of us now, been brought into this fledgling program here at URI, campus-wide program in ocean plastics. And so what I would like to do first, I would like each of you, starting with you, Isa, I'd like you to just sort of tell us a little bit about the sort of wider range of how your involvement is in this, and what you would like our audience to know before we might take a deeper dive into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about textiles and textile sustainability today. So my background is in textile mechanical engineering, which is basically about processing raw materials and to produce yarns and fabrics. However, I always wanted to do something to be more involved in the people-centered type of research. So as you said, I performed a lot of research on measuring the comfort in users wearing different textiles. But this is only one part, one side of my research interests, the impact of textiles on humans. Recent years have shown us that we have to change our perspective and think more about how we influence textiles and how we can impact our environment through textiles. So this is literally the goal of my future research. But also recently, I worked on a project called Conversion of Ocean Plastic Waste into Economically Viable Fibers. And I need to tell you that I discovered what happened to the ocean and what microplastics and nanoplastics and microfibers are. And honestly, I was very sad about that. I was shocked. And I knew that I have to do something about that. So I think my need to act brought me to the University of Rhode Island.
Sarai, where do you come into all of this?
Okay, thank you, Carl, and thank you, Isa, for your lovely introduction. So I'm actually coming from a different angle. So I'm an assistant professor at the College of Business, but in the management area. And well, this is my fourth year here at URI, and I teach strategic management for senior business students before they graduate, before they really step into the world. So I am coming from a social science lens, and I mostly conduct more ethnographic research. And the focus of my studies is sustainability and how organizations, how businesses engage with environmental and social concerns. So I'm not necessarily like from within textiles and sustainability, but before coming to URI, I studied sustainability concerns in the fashion and textiles industries. That was like focus of my entire dissertation, actually. And my general approach to research is studying and articulating processes and transformation organizations, transformation industries. And in the project that I've done, I studied this one large fashion company. It's a US one large fashion company, and I studied its journey, its evolution, and transforming the organization towards sustainability. And as I was focused on this organization, I wanted to understand where the company is positioned in the industry. So during that process, I also attended several textile conferences, conducted observations in these events as well. I also did more of an ethnographic study at one of its supply chain all the way through Turkey. I visited all the facilities in the supply chain, doing more in-depth study. And there I learned a lot about major environmental and social issues going on in producing textiles. And I can talk about this later. And that was my shock too, and that we need to act on things and we need to do things. I mean, this is basically producing a t-shirt takes a lot of effort, and it's not just that simple. So that's how I actually became aware of these important impacts on the oceans as well, specifically about ocean plastic pollution, how textile contributes to that. Now, after I joined URI, I started, engaging with the ocean plastics research that Carl and Isa was talking about. And this is more from a natural science perspective. And I currently have ongoing projects around the subject, and I can talk about them later on as well. But I must say that it's a bit unusual in terms of disciplinary domains that someone from the business school, like in the management area especially, that studies ocean plastics pollution, because it's usually a topic associated with natural sciences and more biological studies. But hopefully I can, change that, because I do think that we need to go to the source of the problem, and business and industry sits right at the center of that.
And that's a really excellent point, and allows me kind of to segue into telling a little bit about myself as the third person here, because we represent such a wide range of disciplines just between the three of us. And I have a background in design. I'm also an ethnographer. I'm an anthropologist of material culture. And you both mentioned that shock and sadness when you start looking at this. And I was happily designing for theater and so on. And then when you start looking at the commerce, the chemistry, the ocean sciences, it's such a wide-ranging problem, and that sadness does kick in. But it's a very interesting thing. I mean, you've mentioned business, you've mentioned social science, you've mentioned ocean sciences, the biological sciences. This is not a simple problem.
Oh no, it's not.
And it's really quite. I mean, I'm just suddenly right now just fascinated by this range of disciplines that's just shown up here in 2 minutes. But let me ask you this. And you mentioned, Isa, I want you to clarify something for our audience here. Tell us a little bit about this idea of the microplastics and the microfibers that Sarai also mentioned in terms of the oceans. What are we looking at there? What is that?
So you all are familiar with the fact that there is some plastic in the ocean floating on the water. So although large pieces of plastic are considered very dangerous, obviously, and they contribute the most to the overall mass of plastic polluting the oceans, they sort of account for a small share, just only a fraction of the total number of plastic. Most plastics in the oceans aren't just containers, aren't just bottles or plastic bags. Instead, we are talking about tiny particles, tiny pieces that are present in the ocean. So the question is, where do they come from, those small pieces? Well, ocean plastic wastes are exposed to some sort of, first of all, to salt, and they stay in a very turbulent water environment. And because of this water turbulence, especially close to the shores, plastic gradually break down. Those larger plastics, they gradually break down into smaller pieces. And this is, actually, there is a classification of plastic wastes floating in the ocean depending on their dimensions and the size. So we have macroplastics, larger elements, mesoplastics, a little bit smaller, and then we have microplastics. They are defined as items below 5,000 microns, which is below 5,000 millimeters.
And
of course, we also have nanoplastics, obviously.
But tell me one thing: is this all coming from the same place? Is this all?
This is a very good question.
Where is this?
So, a particular case of microplastics is microfiber. Now, microfibers are considered as a type of microplastic due to their dimensions, right? But microfibers are unique because they do not necessarily come from broken down larger pieces of plastics floating on the oceans. They actually come from our washing machines. They come from our clothes that shed tiny fibers during the washing process. So this is something that we struggle with right now.
So there we are with these acrylics and the polyester. Clearly, the awful thing. We're all very happy with our leisure wear, but it seems to be damaging the environment. And it brings us to something that Sarai could probably tell us about here. You're talking about the plastics already in the ocean. Sarai, you're dealing with it at its source on some level. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
So, I mean, we know that industry and businesses are plus, actually, let me just give you some statistics, some data about, I was reading this report which came out recently, National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, about plastic waste specifically in the US, but also talks about globe. Think about this. It says there's an estimated 8 million metric tons of plastic waste enter the world's ocean each year. And it's the equivalent of dumping a garbage truck of plastic waste into the ocean every minute. I feel like this is, and it continues. If the current practices continue this way, the discharge in the ocean could reach up to 53 million metric tons per year by 2030, which is roughly half of the total weight of fish caught from the ocean annually. And this is shocking and
shocking and staggering.
Yeah, and it's very sad. Yeah.
Is that a realistic statistic? Would you say, is that actually possible, or is that just extrapolating to the absurd? Or
right now, in terms of trade, that report also talks about what's going on. So, for instance, there are. In the US, the monetary value of exported and imported plastics in 2020 are each about 60 billion. So there are products, categories in different categories that are imported and exported, each 60 billion in the US. And this is like outside of the stuff that is actually produced and consumed in the States. This is, so yes, these are actual real numbers. And the fact that the petrochemicals industry is actually, unfortunately, investing in new construction to build facilities to produce more. So we need to change things. We need to change standards and practices in the industry. I think that's where the source is, and that's hope I'll be able to influence.
Well, let me ask you to expand on that, and then Isa, I'm going to ask you the same question. So, what is it you hope to achieve, Sarai? What is your goal in taking part in this research? What excites you about it?
That's a great question. Well, right now, I'm really beginning my understanding of this concept and this problem phenomena with natural scientists. I'm working with marine biologists, but also social scientists specifically from Marine Affairs Department at URI. So I'm the natural science part of this story. So I'm in a project that has received sea grant funding, and I'm working with Andrew Davis and Colleen Suckling, two marine biologists there. They're looking at the impact of marine plastics to oysters specifically, but the marine ecosystem, including fish and human coastal communities, like fisheries and aquaculture. And there, my role is more like engage with also the stakeholders. So as the experiments going on, mostly NGOs, regulatory agencies, and understand their perspectives and see what the project can give them back in terms of data and any other educational material. So that in that project, I'm more like engaging with the stakeholders. But I expanded that project and turned it into a more of a research engagement with a colleague from Marine Affairs, where we look into the perceptions of people all across the spectrum, on how they understand the phenomena. So we look at the industry meaning like small, like fisheries, aquaculture, but also like individuals, like beachgoers, or but at the same time, like recreational fishermen, but at the same time, the EPA, the regulatory agencies, or NGOs like Save the Bay, Clean Ocean Access, Natural Conservancy, so that we understand how these different parts of the society understand this phenomena, and what they, how their work and lives are disrupted by plastics. So we want to understand more as like a comprehensive way of knowing this phenomena. The goal is to inform policymaking, obviously, in this project.
So it sounds to me like you're very top down at this point.
Yeah.
And maybe later on we have to turn it into educating the general public in a way that is not necessarily being done very well right now.
Exactly. I think right now the science is just reporting some. It's still going on. So, and we would like to, inform. Education, inform policymaking, inform all these stakeholders at the end of the project. Right now things are going. Yeah.
Isa, what about you? What's exciting to you? What do you want to achieve in the next?
Well, I want to stop that from happening. That's what I want. And I know as a researcher, I can do it via education. But I also want to show the research results, the results that are showing what happens if we dump the plastics into the ocean. So in terms of microfibers and the washing process, for example, when we wash clothes, they lose fibers. It has always been this way, and it will probably be this way for quite some time. However, there are ways to mitigate that, and there are specific types of clothing that may shed more than others. Can I have the first slide, please? Yes, thank you. So, for example, studies show that acrylic fabrics shed most fibers, while a blend of cotton and polyester shed a little bit less. So I wanted to add a comment to that research work. The authors did not test all types of fabrics, all types of textiles, all types of raw materials. They didn't do it. They just selected some of the most typical they had around, and they wanted to demonstrate the shedding process as a source of water and ocean contamination. So this is the first thing we can do. We can actually point on that. While in my research, I will perform, I'll definitely test more types of materials, more types of structures, and some possible blends. So I will have a better overview of those materials. Also, I think the focus is here on acrylic because it actually biodegrades in the period of, it starts biodegradation after 200 years. So if you have that quantity of fibers or microfibers in the ocean, we can say that we almost lost the battle to some extent, right? But there are obviously other ways to mitigate and to stop microfibers entering the oceans.
So tell me this now. Stopping them from entering the oceans is one thing. You say there's already too much there. There's a gazillion tons out there already. Can we not do something with the plastics that are already there? Is there any way of using?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, the problem is you can scoop larger pieces, but you cannot really scoop microfibers because you would have to filter the water with to collect microfibers, and you would collect also lower level organisms and plankton and all the nutrients that are in the water serving living creatures. So this is not the solution. I would rather go into direction of filtering water that we release from our washing machines, and that can be done on the home level, I would say. And we don't have washing machines that are having built-in filtering systems right now, but that could be easy, and also could be easy way to change the filters at home.
I understand that France has made those mandatory, or they will be mandatory in a couple of years there.
So there are people thinking about that as
Yeah.
well. And obviously, when your home filter, when you do not have a washing machine with the filter, what else can you do? Well, there are some existing solutions like filter bags. For example, you put a piece of a textile you want to wash into a bag, and then you put a bag into the washing machine. So during the washing process, the bag can capture the fibers that are released, and they do not go to the sewage then. So that's also one of very simple solutions, but obviously it's cost related. Someone needs to buy those bags, right?
Yes, and it's not just cost related. It also requires us to change our behaviors in terms of how we operate with our clothing, with our laundry, in terms of our attitudes. It sounds like it's an even more uphill battle than getting people to recycle even today. But Sarai, what do you see? What do you see as being something we could actually do on an individual level, on a domestic level, on a small scale business level? What could we do you think?
Well, I think, to be honest, for me, introducing filtering to, washing machines, of course, it's a step, but it doesn't mean that we can continue producing these materials. These are, I feel like, treating the symptoms rather than going to the actual problem, the center, the core of the issue. So, as Isa mentioned, that acrylic and other materials, we need to rethink about these materials. And obviously, it's not easy to change materials like that. For instance, the company that I did study, my study, they are pioneers in the fashion industry, actually trying to change things, and they have been for so long. And even then, like, they were trying to, for instance, I observed that they were trying to change rayon, which is maybe Isa can describe the material's properties, but it has negative impact to the environment. And they were trying to use a different material like viscose or tensile. Actually, that was what they're trying to do. But the problem is it's a different touch, it's a different feel, the way it's styled. Customers don't wanna, they wanna buy that specific material rather than another material, even though they're the same cut, same pattern, same design, same color, whatever, but they want that other thing. So it's not that easy, from the business side also, because, industry is dependent on, sales and revenues that they generate from customers, right? And also shareholder wealth, obviously. But so I'm not sure if there's like a solution like that. So it's a more complicated, culturally embedded problem that we need to think more holistically, I would say.
Which is interesting, because that's it keeps going through my head that it becomes about behavior. It becomes about the nature of our daily lives and our commerce and our wearing of things and our hygiene practices. And suddenly what some might perceive as simply chemical problem or an ocean problem is now something that requires a major cultural shift. And the question is, where do we do that? So I would want to ask you right now, both of you, and I'll start with you, Isa. You know, here we are in an educational institution. We have all these young people. What do you think would be the primary teaching that we need to bring to help mitigate this? What do we teach them?
So Carl, before we move forward, I would like to comment on what Sarai said. I think we want to be able to exclude nylon, polyester, and acrylic from our environment. And also, I don't think it's needed. And I wouldn't like that, because polyester and nylon are wonderful, wonderful, extremely useful materials that were produced for, starting from 1940s. And, they are resilient, they are strong, they offer extremely useful properties in textiles and in garments. So I think it's also not a way to go. But what we could do, we can start teaching people also about how we consume those materials. And the fact that maybe we should switch into higher quality product versus large quantity with lower quality, because I think this is also what we see during our washing process. When you wash clothes that offer high quality, they tend to maintain the shape, they tend to maintain the appearance for a longer period of time. However, if you purchase a product or products of low quality, perhaps after 20 washes, you are not happy with your item and you buy more often. We just buy too much in general. And we buy too much because this is a current, attitude of the textile industry to offer larger quantities, to offer overproduction of textiles. And we don't have to, it's affordable. But on the other hand, since there is this overproduction, we tend to toss a lot of garbage. Mm-hmm. So can I ask for a slide number 2? Which I think nicely shows what happens right now with the current overproduction and a large quantity of tossed textile goods that are currently all over the world. So this is only Chile situation, but I'm sure we can, dig deeper and find places like that elsewhere. So again, if you ask me what to do right now, I would say buy less and wash less.
So Sarai, what's the business model then, if that's where we're going to go? We're 100 and something years into the other model. What do we do? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure about business models, but I think the core of the problem is understanding. So I teach strategic management, and I emphasize that decision making is very important, actually, and decision making at all levels, at individual level, organizational level, industry level, institutional level, whatever levels are. So decision making, we make decisions, we take actions, and then it has consequences on things, and there are stakeholders who are affected by these decisions. And so that's, I think it's very important for educators, like I'm trying to do that in my classes, for students to understand every decision making has a consequence on different stakeholders, and understanding these negative and positive impact on these groups is very critical. Mm-hmm. So like for instance, I'm thinking like we may prefer as, and also there's a human beings. I mean, we are living in a society that our lives, we see humans as more superior than the rest of nature, and it's more coming from an environmental philosophy perspective, but we have been evolved as a social and culturally, community-wise, as a society, many societies that we see ourselves as superior, more Western philosophy, and some materials may be good for humans and some materials may be durable for, for our use. But I do think that we also need to consider animals, plants, and natural environment as a stakeholder, and what's the impact on them when we think about what's good for us, what's good for, our well-being. So, and there's also that. So I'm not sure if there's like a one business model that we can follow, but
no, I'm sure if there were, we would be following it. But tell me a little bit more about the stakeholders, though, in terms of I'm just absolutely fascinated by the idea of enlarging the frame to include the natural world. That's just I'm going to have to just lie down after our session here today and think about that for a little bit. That's an amazing thought. But tell me about the stakeholders, the human stakeholders. I'm sure you're not just talking about governments and corporations.
No, I mean, well, when we talk about stakeholders, I think we should also talk about marginalized communities and environmental injustice going on those communities. For instance, where the plastic production takes place. I don't know if everyone knows about Cancer Alley in Louisiana, that there are these like several petrochemicals that produce plastics, and it's been nicknamed as a Cancer Alley, that area that tells you what the impacts are for the community. And usually those communities of color and low income communities. So that's one aspect, for instance. But at the same time, as I mentioned, like non-humans and marine ecosystem that now I'm engaged with my biologist that I'm seeing. So these are some of the, I think, very important communities that we usually overlook.
Yeah, and so with that, I mean, we've ranged around quite a bit here, and this idea of a multidisciplinary problem. It's a wide-ranging, wicked problem. I want to hear a little bit about what kind of collaborations you might be excited about, either here on campus or elsewhere. And Isa, let me start with you. Where do you see your work dovetailing, overlapping, working with other disciplines specifically, or in your dreams?
Yeah. So before I move forward with this one, I wanted also to kind of refer to what we were talking about. And I think we did not really use a very important word, which is recycling. And I would add that to all the activities that we should focus on and that we were talking about. And also the numbers, if you want to talk about numbers, I think right now the statistics says that about probably over 95% of clothing, also those that you could see from the desert in Chile, will end up at landfills and will never be recycled. It will be just burned. So I would work on, again, education and kind of creating opportunities to recycle more. And for that, I would work definitely with all the business stakeholders and all of those who wants me to perform the research for them. So we have our local company, Sarai, that we talked about projects in the past. And I could use, for example, my microcompounder that was recently purchased by the university, by the College of Business, as my startup, which is a very sophisticated, high quality equipment for over $180,000. And it will help me to mix, blend different sort of materials and extrude them. And extrusion might be for textiles again. But it could be also for 3D printing. So there are a lot of possibilities, and I would, encourage business to work with us on the solutions that they may think of in the future.
Sounds very exciting. We're going to go to questions from the audience in just a minute, but Sarai, tell me about your vision in terms of collaborative efforts, and show me the net of resources that we might have here.
So one thing I want to mention before talking about collaboration is one of the business models that are actually emerging right now, especially in Europe, is circular economy. It's more of based on the idea of what Isa was talking about, recycling, and putting the resources back into the game, and creating new products out of those wasted resources. So that's one way of going. It's still ongoing, so we don't know if it's really effective or not. But yeah, in terms of collaboration, I do think that as researchers, I mean, from the management side, that as a social scientist, it would be important to collaborate with businesses, like the one that I actually studied. I'm admiring them. They have been trying so hard and trying to create an industry change, and there is an industry change in the fashion and textiles, definitely, on these topics, on these issues, on these concerns. And I do think that as academics, we need to collaborate with them and try to tackle this together. That's for sure. I mean, I can name one company here. Patagonia is very much collaborating with both natural scientists and social scientists. And they are trying, now they're doing a great job in terms of ocean plastics pollution, because their materials, I mean, this is a very environmental conscious company, and the clothing that they make is more outdoors, and people who love going outdoor. So it was ironical for them to, create materials that would actually have negative impacts on environment. So they're really taking charge and leading this collaborations with scientists and social scientists to tackle the issue. So that's definitely a one thing that most important from my discipline coming. It's important to collaborate. And also, I'm collaborating with natural sciences too, because this is not a one discipline issue. Like, I don't think that one discipline can tackle it. So that's my 2 cents. I won't go on furthermore. I would love to have other questions.
I'd love to hear about the other 98 cents, but that's okay. The circular economy is a very interesting concept to bring to bear to this discussion, and one that might be bandied about a bit in ways that is hard to understand, or maybe a little bit too loose. But that, to me, for example, in terms of where I would want to go, if I can put my 2 cents in, is that I would very much like to see that happen and prove that as a concept in a local textile context here around the Bay Area, in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and see if we could actually make it work for a few years. It's a daunting thought, but a very important one, I think, to bring that, because there's so many pieces, and there's the chicken and the egg and the, yeah, but anyway. But we have some questions from the audience, and we have a question about plastic beads in cosmetics. Isa, are you aware of how those might be impacting anything? Or Sarai, do you have a sense of the exfoliants and the cosmetic side of this thing?
Yeah, so microbeads are considered as dangerous as microfibers, in effect. And well, since they were, they are present in many types of cosmetics and beautification products. I think there are some legal steps towards removing those in some countries. I'm not sure what's the situation in the United States right now, but from the perspective of a researcher, I would say, well, synthetic materials creating microbeads could be replaced by natural that will that will biodegrade after a while. So that's but I think some of the countries just really literally forbid production of the cosmetics containing microbeads.
Okay, so definitely a serious business.
Yeah.
There's another question here which I have a comment on, but I'll see if you want to pick it up first, and I'm going to widen it out. The questioner asked about how public policy could drive behavior in terms of taxation, and I would widen that question and wonder whether you have any thoughts on incentives in general, both on an individual level and on an industrial or commercial level. What kind of incentives might help us at least start to turn this corner?
Yeah, so I will probably leave it to Sarai, but I have one thought that is with me, and I had this thought when I started working on ocean plastic waste. What's the reason why we do not heavily tax virgin materials and sort of, give some sort of relief for production of recycled materials? I have never found the answer to that question, but that seems to be a very straightforward solution.
Mm-hmm. So in the sense, if I were a textile manufacturer and you could...
Yeah, so I imagine that if virgin materials are heavily taxed, people naturally drift to recycled materials.
Understood. Okay. Sarai, do you have a thought on incentives or taxes or fees? Or?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the policy making, the role of policy making is huge, I think, in this aspect. Well, one thing that I am actually reading that that some scientists are actually calling policy making to categorize plastics. But when I say plastics, please, I apologize for my ignorance. When I say plastics, I don't mean the plastics as a material, but we need to, I think Isa knows as a materially there are different compounds or different molecules that are actually toxic, but I just call them plastics, not plastics. But scientists are actually, or some scientists are actually categorizing this material or compound as toxic and hazardous, so that we don't use it in everyday products and so on. So there's a huge role, I think, for policy making. Just that is a first step, but also in other things like single-use plastics that when you go to the grocery store that we buy fruit and vegetables, and they're all single-use plastics. I mean, I feel like there should be some policy making around this, and I also do feel that we talk about consumers a lot. I mean, individuals in a society, but I also feel that these ethical issues are dumped into individual level, that these are consumers' ethical problems now, that you need to feel guilty about things. But no, I don't think so. I mean, there's also obviously individual ethical decision making, but these things are not problems that one individual or many individuals can solve, but these things are at a more political economy level, more policy level, that is important for these actors to take action.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it is quite frankly a public health issue.
Yeah.
And needs to be treated on some level in that way as well. And I know it is a bit of an awful thought to think of it that way, but very true that we're being saddled with this guilt factor of, oh, I need to be responsible for this, and not necessarily creating the impact that we would wish by doing so. But there are audience questions coming in on that note in terms of being able to recycle clothing and that concern that we have. I would like to recycle my clothing. How do I do that in Rhode Island? Can either of you inform our audience on how that works? How that works?
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether there is any formal program helping collecting used clothes. I know there are some containers here and there where you can put your clothes, your shoes, and they will be investigated, refreshed, and perhaps someone can take the advantage of them, use them if the original owner is not interested in the product.
And there is the yellow bag program. You may be familiar with that, where you can leave a yellow bag full of textile products next to your recycle bin, and a separate entity will come and collect that.
Yeah, but this is, I would say, the scale of that is nothing to compare to what we actually need.
Yeah, and that again is the problem, and that is that guilt factor again. And in some way, part of the sort of general greenwashing of this affair, even though it's not necessarily consciously done, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, Carl.
Go ahead.
I wanted to add to Isa's that there are some companies doing that, private companies, and they're collecting used clothes to recycle. They also work with other companies. There are these new startups companies, technology companies, are trying to shred the fabric into pulps and then turn it into a yarn. However, and I think Isa can speak to that much more than me, not all clothing can be recyclable because of the mix of materials.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So I know of a booming business in Italy where the old sweaters and old garments made of wool are collected, and they are cleaned, processed, and the company offers several types of woolen yarns to sell. So that's a good approach. However, here we are talking about 100% a woolen product. If you have a blend, polyester cotton, which is popular, how to recycle that material? Yeah, that's the biggest issue, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the answer is we should get back to square one and start producing pure polyester, pure cotton, pure wool. I don't know.
Well, I did a little bit of research into clothing for long duration space travel in the pre-pandemic age, and one of the things we saw there that actually the most efficient thing to do would be for everybody to wear polyester all the time, as long as we could put it into a recycling loop. But then there we are again. So. I don't know. It's an interesting future if you think about it that way. That if we stop actually using petrochemicals to if we just stop burning them basically to make things move, maybe we can create a recycling loop of endless polyester. Or am I just being a dreamer here? What do you think?
Well, everything is possible, I guess. But so I sort of wanted to combine what Sarai was saying together with one of the questions we had about recycling programs in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. So I know there are facilities in Rhode Island that collect materials for recycling, and they do process waste and garbage. But there is an issue, as Sarai mentioned, with single-use plastic waste, single bags. The reason for that is that the current infrastructure, not only in Rhode Island, elsewhere too, is not really ready to process single-use plastic bags. And those bigger pieces, they just, break the machines. So that's why we kind of stocked with processing of those materials that, by the way, if they are used for only 1 or 3 minutes, they are pretty clean. They could be processed. Mm-hmm. And I know they are collected in some collecting facilities, but they are not processed because they can damage the equipment.
Mhm. So there's a question here about finding a list of environmentally responsible clothing and textile companies. And yes, there are lists out there. There you can go online, and I would suggest actually just hitting the Google with that. But there are definitely lists of such things. I would look for fairtradecertified.org, for example, would be a good one. And because that takes it into an even larger realm than just the non-pollutants. But there are several organizations tracking this sort of thing, and it's really worthwhile spending some time finding those lists and internalizing them. But I would ask, and our organizers apparently can send a follow-up email to our audience, and we'll pull together some links that we can send to you, along with about local recycling efforts as well. So stay tuned for more. All right, so let's see. I think we're coming up to time here, unless we have one more question. And we do have one more question. Can consumers influence change in the fashion industry? Sarai, take us from the bottom up rather than the top down.
I mean, in this economic model, yes, definitely. It's the consumers are they have a very high influence in organizations' decision making. And because they are the source of revenue. So definitely they do, but they do when they act as a group, as a large group. Yeah, but
so give me some advice as a consumer. How do I prompt this just in my normal day-to-day behavior?
So one problem over here, and I think it's a big problem, is that these environmentally organic or more natural fibers cost much higher. Like they're priced much higher than if you go to Walmart or Target and get a blended product. So there's the cost of it, and so there are people who can afford buying these things, but there are people who cannot afford. I mean, at our university, our educators, our students, they already have student loan. I mean, I cannot expect from my own students to go and buy these high-end brands that produce only organic cotton or wool from, alpaca, like very purely treated, and so on. So no, I mean, in that aspect, I don't think that consumers are the sole responsible actors here, but that they're part of the issue, but we need to change our consumer behavior as a society, I think.
Well, thank you, Sarai, and thank you, Isa. That's, I'm afraid, all we have time for today. We could go on forever, and I do hope we do go on for years working on this. And I wish the two of you all the best in your endeavors, and I look forward to working with you in this project in future. So thank you to our audience. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today, and I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something that makes you want to learn more. And I hope you learned something that makes you want to perhaps change things. As I mentioned earlier, you'll get an email in the next few days with some links and maybe some reading and resources. And be back here on March 2nd with Professor Jason Jacks, Assistant Professor of Multimedia Journalism, for a faculty office hour. And from what I know of Jason's work, it is absolutely fascinating. So you will enjoy that. Thanks again. Have a great day, everybody, and look forward to maybe talking to all of you again someday. Bye-bye.